seeing all the wildlife that existed there, um, critters that I could rarely see anywhere else, such as river otters playing, um, lots of unusual birds, such as least bitterns, and many, many marsh rabbits, any place there was enough ground for them to move around, often incidentally covered in ticks, which is something to keep in mind when you do visit wetlands. Um, you can imagine what I felt on my very first visit to the Dulles Wetlands in the late 1990s, which I'd heard about and I'd heard was a great birding location. I'd heard from some of the people that were working on evaluating it to determine how effective it was as a wetlands. They'd been hired by the Greenway and the wetlands engineer who was redesigning it. And it's a very special place, not just for us, humankind, but for the plants and the animals that thrive there. Um, we're lucky to have the Dulles wetlands and the many other wetlands which now exist in Loudoun County. This particular photo is from 1967, and it shows the area where the Dulles wetlands is now. On the upper left-hand corner is Little Oatlands, with Oatlands right above it. And the wetlands is that recently plowed field that's in the center of the screen. Um, and another part of the wetlands is down here. Banshee Reeks is over in this area here. And this is what it looked like in 1967. All agricultural fields being heavily used. We're lucky to have not just the Dulles wetlands, but the many wetlands which now exist in Loudoun County. And that wasn't always the case. In fact, it was national and local policy throughout the United States and actually even in colonial times to destroy wetlands, to drain them, to fill them. And that was the case until the mid 1970s. People didn't realize how important a role wetlands play, not only for the wildlife that exists there and the plants that exist there, but in protecting and preserving the entire natural world, but also in protecting and preserves and helping us out. In 1977, less than 50 years ago, President Jimmy Carter issued an executive order ending federal assistance for draining and filling wetlands. While this had all probably been wetlands at one point, um, through using federal funds, often through USDA and state funds, the wetlands that had existed here had been drained. Drainage tiles had been installed in these areas. Trickle ditches were put in, straight ditches that allow water to flow out more easily. Um, and Jimmy Carter began the changing of that process in 1977 with that executive order. Um, People had started realizing how important wetlands were. And as a result, they had, they realized that it not only helps clean water, it also does an extensive job of mitigating flooding. Um, but it was after that time period that more and more work began, and work on the wetlands, excuse me, began with as Tom said, with the construction of the Dulles Greenway in around 1993, 1994. And it was a mitigation project for all the wetlands destroyed during that construction. By 2002, which is the date of this aerial photograph, you can see that wetlands are beginning to come back there. There's a lot of water here in this area that's north of the Goose Creek, and some that's down here where they were also doing mitigation. Um, there's a beginning to get some vegetation growth, vegetative growth is beginning to happen here, but there was still really a long way to go. Um, and this is a view of the wetlands in 2006, and the next photo is also going to be 2006. You can see that it's primarily open at this particular time. There's some trees, there's some shorter vegetation here. There's a little bit of water in the center of the wetlands. Cattails are beginning to move into the area. Um, And this is the area in the back, by the way, that borders the Goose Creek on the top of the photo. This is another photo. You can see how shallow the wetlands are in these days. You can see the vegetation that's coming. And in the background, you can see Little Oatlands, which incidentally, Little Oatlands has existed since 2004. I'm sorry, since 1804. And they were probably the people that at that time helped drain the wetlands on this property and made it into agricultural land. Um, but this is still early days. In 2004, um, we found our first pair of bald eagles nesting on the wetlands. They were nesting in a very large sycamore along Goose Creek, a large sycamore that has since then come down. They ended up having to find another tree for their nest after that, but they did very well. Interestingly enough, the nest that was built that very first year was built relatively late in their nesting season. I don't think it actually ended up occurring that they were working on the nest until February or so. And what people are pretty sure it was because of construction that was occurring to the east of the wetlands had inadvertently taken out of a bald eagle nest. And the reason why I say inadvertently is it's against the law to do any damage to an eagle nest, not even to come close to it, especially at that time when they were still threatened and endangered in the United States. Anyway, um, this is the wetlands in as it is in 2006. And you can see it's starting to get a whole lot more vegetation in it. It's becoming much more heavily wooded and all. And I'm sorry, jumping forward. Anyway, it really does make a difference and it helps with the wetlands that have come in. They've continued to evolve, largely because of the extensive beaver population there. I paid a visit to the wetlands back quite a few years ago when the beavers had really moved into this area with the wetlands engineer that had designed this place. He and the management of the Greenway, we all went out there and took a look at it. And he was absolutely thrilled to see that the work they were doing. Um, they were constructing their own dams, causing the water to back up more extensively in a lot of places where there was drainage occurring. They made sure that the spillways that were scattered throughout were somewhat covered, and as a result, the wetlands got deeper and deeper. And since then, we've seen it even get more heavily forested. And one of the things we did, Loudoun Wildlife, um, early on, back around 2010 or so, was we put in a bluebird nest trail there, which is basically a nest trail for cavity nesters, which bluebirds and tree swallows take over. And this is a tree swallow nest, not a bluebird nest. And tree swallow nest, one of the prettiest ones out there. Um, what ended up happening was the property has become even more vegetated. A lot of the meadow habitat that bluebirds like has disappeared, and as a result, there are fewer and fewer bluebirds on the property, while there are other species that are using it. And we no longer maintain a cavity nest trail boxes there. However, there are plenty of cavities in the trees that exist there. Um, the other wildlife that is there, that has absolutely thrived there, um, because of the way the place is set up, is one of the things that certainly comes in are any plants that love having their feet wet. And a lot of milkweed does. This is a monarch caterpillar on common milkweed, which is scattered throughout the site where there isn't standing water. And it's really made a difference for a lot of other animals. Um, this is a slatty um, skimmer dragonfly, and dragonflies absolutely thrive in wetlands. They actually lay their eggs in the water and they hunt their prey there. There've been a tremendous amount of birds there. This photo of great blue herons, by the way, is in an area where the water is much deeper now. This is shallower, but a lot of wading birds, great egrets, great blue herons, An occasional nighthawk ends up showing up at this property. Um, but again, the habitat has really changed there as has gone on. Um, we found, by the way, it's gotten a tremendous amount of nesting waterfowl there. We get a lot of wintering waterfowl at this time of year, and then hooded mergansers and wood ducks and a few other species nest there at other times of the year. And I'll talk more about those in the program that I'm going to be doing on birds towards the end of February. Anyway, um, it's just what has really happened at the wetlands in the last few years is the black willows have come in, the water levels come up, it's become heavily vegetated. As a result, a tremendous amount, a good deal of wildlife can actually hide back in the wetlands. It's not as open, as easy for us to find it, but it's there and it's utilizing it. There's a good population of mammals there, which Jenny will touch on, in addition to the beavers, which we frequently see if we're there at dawn or dusk moving around. There's other animals and stuff that work there too. Um, but I would like to thank you first for joining me and watching this and hearing about this. And at this particular point, what I'm going to do is thank you very much and remind you to tune in for the next programs that are coming up and turn the program over to Liz, who is our next speaker. And let me end my sharing at this particular point.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joe. Appreciate that. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll get to them at the end of the program. And as Joe said, our next speaker is Liz Dennison. Liz Dennison, sorry. She is a longtime Loudoun Wildlife volunteer, and she serves as the Eagle Specialist on the Dulles Greenway Eagle Cam. Liz has been working with birds of prey for more than 15 years as an educator, rehabilitator, and falconer. And in 2016, she founded the nonprofit organization Secret Gardens, Birds, and Bees. And she did that to share her love for birds of prey and to spread the word about the essential role they play in healthy ecosystems. So we're very thankful to have her with us here too tonight. And Liz, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, and I will start sharing my screen here. So today I am going to be talking about the role that eagles play in the Dulles Greenway Wetlands. I'm not going to be talking about the eagles that we've been watching there for a couple of years. I'll be talking about that in a few weeks, so I really hope you'll all join us for that. But I am going to talk about how eagles in general help to shape the Dulles Greenway Wetlands. Now, if I'm going to start by talking a little bit of history of eagles. You know, if let's click on this. If you are about my age, then you remember a time when there weren't very many eagles in the lower 48 states. In fact, I had never seen an eagle in the wild until I took a trip to Alaska. And as we left the airport at Anchorage in a bus, the bus driver had to stop because everybody was so excited about seeing an eagle flying over. That's how rare it was for us here in the lower states. And this lack of eagle population was due to the pesticide DDT. Now, use of DDT began around 1940 and it really peaked around 1960. And it worked its way into the soil and into the water pretty much worldwide. And unfortunately, it had an unintended consequence in that it weakened the eggs or the egg shells of many, many birds. That includes eagles and falcons and herons and condors as well. And those eggs would then break during incubation and the populations just plummeted. It wasn't until 1972, several years after Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, raised awareness about the dangers of DDT, that it was finally banned for most uses in the US. Now, the recovery didn't happen overnight. The birds are recovering, but not overnight. As you can see from this chart for eagles within the United States, the recovery was kind of slow. between 1972 and 2001, almost 30 years. But the population really took off after that, going from about 650 breeding pairs in the lower 48 over that 30-year period to more than 3,000 pairs in the next 2 decades. And that population continues to grow now to the point where we have pretty much nest saturation and a lot of free-floating unpaired eagles in the region as well. Some birds like condors are still struggling, but the eagles are doing quite well. Now that's the story for the entire overall lower 48 states. But now, what about what's happening right here around the Dulles Greenway Wetland? So this chart here shows results from the Christmas bird counts for the 15-mile diameter circle that includes the Dulles Greenway, the Greenway Wetlands. And you can see that the numbers were pretty low between 1997 and the lower 2000s, and then it really kind of took off. And the 2023 Christmas bird count found 91 bald eagles on that single day in that 15-mile diameter circle. 91. That's a lot of eagles. Now, of course, these counts are not exact numbers. They vary by what's seen on that day, by the number of people counting, the number of hours they count, and by the weather on that day. But the trend is really clear. We have a very healthy population of eagles right around the wetlands. Now, if these eagles are affecting the wetlands, what about them makes them so important? Well, first of all, eagles are very big. A lot of people who haven't seen an eagle up close really don't have any idea how big they are. When I do a lot of my talks with my red-tailed hawk, when I get them out, people say, "Is that an eagle?" That's not even close. My hawk weighs, about 2.5 pounds. And the smallest eagle I have ever worked with was a small 7-pound male. My friend Maggie here is holding Maxime, a big 14-pound female at the University of Minnesota Raptor Center. So, you get an idea seeing Maxime with Maggie there, just how big eagles can be. Now, why does that size matter in the wild and in the wetlands? Well, bald eagles are apex predators. They are truly at the top of the food chain. They have no predators in the wild that prey on them. They occupy the highest trophic level and they are a keystone species. So there are no predators that prey on them. That doesn't mean they are completely safe. Obviously, their nestlings could be at risk from all kinds of predators, from crows to raccoons, even squirrels if the nest is unattended. But there are no predators that will prey on a healthy adult bald eagle. They are also a keystone species, and that's important. Keystone species are the ones that really shape an ecosystem. You could say they are the glue that holds an ecosystem together. So if I'm talking about eagles, why am I showing a starfish that isn't even found in the wetlands? Well, that starfish was part of a very important experiment that really changed the way people think about the effects of some of these top predators on an ecosystem. Robert Payne found a small outcropping of rock that was home to 15 species. This starfish was the apex predator, the keystone species in this little ecosystem. He removed every starfish, and the little ecosystem changed dramatically and rather quickly. The specific changes aren't important to this talk, but what is important is that removing or adding an top predator to an ecosystem changes that ecosystem. Now, this wetland is not as simple as that little outcropping of rock. So remember, the bald eagles are not the only predators and not the only top species in the ecosystem. One thing that complicates this is that bald eagles are not the only apex predators in the wetland. There are also river otters, great blue herons, great horned owls, snapping turtles, and probably a few more that I haven't thought of, and they also shape the ecosystem. So I went looking for a diagram that might illustrate some of the dependencies among these top predators in an ecosystem like the Dulles Wetlands. And I found this diagram of a simplified food web for a freshwater pond. And if this is simple, I don't think I really want to see the full complex diagram. But you can see that everything is interrelated, that changing any one of these things has a potential to change the ecosystem. But this still leaves the bald eagles and several others at the top. Now, if they are at the top, what are they doing? Well, as I said, they are apex predators, and they are preying on almost anything that moves. Fish are a very large part of a bald eagle's diet, and there are plenty of fish in the ponds at the wetlands, but they will also take waterfowl that are on those ponds or nesting there, small mammals, reptiles, and amphibians. When we were monitoring the nest in the wetland, I think we saw just about every kind of animal brought in, including, unfortunately, a domestic cat. Ducklings were a favorite for feeding the young, and no one really wanted to see that. And you can imagine, and turtles too. You can imagine the effect this might have on the behavior of prey species. It causes stress that impacts their foraging and feeding, their courtship and nesting. But even so, species are abundant in the wetland, and this is probably due to the fact that there is vegetation, there are places to hide, there are places to be safe. And we also need to consider that this is helpful because the eagles are often taking the weaker, the older of a species and helping to improve the general health of the population. It's all about balance. When the predator-prey numbers are balanced, both species benefit and both can thrive. Bald eagles are also scavengers. They are always ready to pounce on an easy meal. They, along with vultures, are part of nature's cleanup crew, removing dead animals and preventing the spread of disease. You may have seen them along the roads feeding on roadkill, where sadly many are hit by cars. And they are not above grabbing a snack from a dumpster or from the local landfill where they find human leftovers and an abundance of mice and rats. And one thing we really enjoyed sometimes seeing or weren't actually too happy about was the fact that they would bring some very interesting things back to the nest from the landfill and the dumpsters. The nearby landfill is an eagle congregation site where young eagles learn from adults and socialize with potential mates. That brings them some dangers too. Whenever birds congregate, there is a potential to spread disease among them. And there is currently a highly pathogenic avian influenza circulating, spread primarily by migrating waterfowl. That is nearly 100% fatal for birds of prey, even though many of the waterfowl are asymptomatic. Eagles and vultures are particularly susceptible, and there have been cases at the landfill. But even so, landfills are generally beneficial for the eagles, and the wetland benefits by having that landfill just about between a mile and 2 miles away. Bald eagles are kleptoparasites. They are bullies. We like to think of them as being noble, but they often use their size and strength to steal food from others, sometimes from other top predators, like the heron in this lower left photo. And that's an eagle stealing a fish from river otters in the upper right photo, although that's a little bit hard to see. And I think we've all seen the photo of the eagle trying to steal the rabbit from the fox. This isn't always safe for the eagles. River otters are, if you recall, also top of the food chain, and river otters are perfectly capable of killing a bald eagle if it doesn't get away with its fish quickly enough. Now, the impact of this is obvious. Someone loses their meal, they could go hungry. At critical times, like these cold winter days with snow cover when prey is scarce, or when trying to raise a brood of young, this could be life-threatening. So it's not only the prey species that are stressed by the presence of eagles. Predators on the lower trophic levels, and sometimes on the same level, are stressed as well. Then there's the guy fishing. There are lots of examples of eagles stealing fish from people. Now, there is no fishing on the wetlands, but there is fishing sometimes in the adjacent Goose Creek. And eagles also steal ducks from hunters. They grab the duck from the water before the hunter and their dog can get to it. And this makes people angry. And we do have some hunting on the other side of the river, and we do see hunters along the river occasionally in the wetlands. So this is something of concern to us. And if the eagles get what the hunter has shot, this gets people kind of angry, and it is one of the reasons that sometimes eagles are shot. It happens way too often. I have seen it as a rehabber way too often. I can't imagine the thinking behind shooting the eagle, but it happens and it carries a significant fine. If you and possibly some jail time. If you ever witness a shooting, please report it to the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources or to law enforcement. It is a crime. And I'm going to pause here for just a minute to talk about lead poisoning in eagles. This lead poisoning comes mainly from their scavenging, but it can also come from being shot. And it comes from them feeding on the remains of a deer, for example, that a hunter has shot and dressed in the field and left a gut pile that the eagles and other scavengers feed upon. And if they are using lead shot, this lead will poison the eagles and any other scavenger that consumes those remains. And the problem is that it doesn't take much to kill an animal. A piece of lead the size of a grain of rice is enough to poison and kill a bald eagle. And even more alarming than that, long studies with many, many eagles over many years have shown that 46% of the bald eagles in the wild have some level of lead poisoning, and 47% of the golden eagles. And about 30% have acute lead poisoning. So this is something we really need to stop. And I just felt that I had to put that in here somewhere. I couldn't go by without it. Bald eagles will also defend the nest territory and the area around it, especially during the courtship and nesting season. And that will keep some other predators from nesting in the area. And it can also provide protection for other animals in that area right around the nest. And this brings me to the relationship between eagles and great blue herons. Right now, we don't have any heron rookeries in the Dulles Greenway Wetlands, and that's a little disappointing. I was really hoping that there would be some because eagles and herons often nest together. The Center for Conservation Biology has found heron rookeries near or surrounding an eagle nest more often than would be explained by the fact that they prefer similar habitat and types of trees. It's a little surprising because one would expect the eagles to prey on the heron chicks, and maybe they do. Or maybe they don't due to the number of herons or the potential for harassment by the herons if they try to take their chicks. My thought, and I think there are some experts that agree with me, is that the herons derive benefit from the eagle's defense of their nesting territory from other predators like hawks and owls, and from the ever-growing number of unpaired eagles known as floaters. And a 2013 article published in Canadian Science analyzed the effects of great blue herons nesting near bald eagles in the Pacific Northwest. And it found that 70% of heron nests and 19% of heron colonies were located within 200 meters of eagles' nests with high reproductive success. In fact, these herons had greater reproductive success than those nesting far from eagles' nests. So I'm really hoping that eventually we will see some heron rookeries here, and it's possible because there are some downstream and all along the Potomac as well. Now, even when a nest is not in use by the eagles, it is a resource for other birds and animals. A young hawk might visit looking for a leftover scrap of food. A raccoon might do the same, and you never know what you might find in a nest, like a corn cob that raccoon found. A squirrel might harvest nesting material or even make a home for himself in the lower levels of the huge structure, the basement. Small birds might raise their young in the basement too, or maybe an owl will take it over for a season. There's always something going on, and as one of the nest watchers, I probably shouldn't say this, but sometimes it's even more interesting than watching the eagles. And these last pictures are actually from our eagle's nest with the camera. And, we really hope you will join us in watching that nest this year, regardless of whether the eagles actually use it, because it is fascinating to watch the wildlife from that nest. Okay, well, thank you very much. And that's about all I have to say on this Dulles Wetlands today. And I look forward to talking to you more about the nest itself.
All right. Thank you so much, Liz. Appreciate all that great information. And did see a question come in, and we will be holding that till after Jenny completes her presentation, but looking forward to getting a couple answers for you guys there who have been asking questions. So thank you for that. And please feel free to keep them coming. So our final presenter of the evening is Jenny Erickson. She is Loudoun Wildlife's Amphibian and Reptile Monitoring Program Coordinator. Jenny has a background in zoological fieldwork as a behavior specialist, and she's worked with elephants, rhinos, bears, red wolves, and many other species. She has been a huge asset in updating herpetological data for Loudoun County also, and assisting in studies of the elusive spadefoot toads. So she will have a lot of interesting information to share with you tonight. And Jenny, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. And let me share. So this is more of an introduction to the unseen world of the Dulles Wetlands. As we'll mention probably a couple of times, the full program will be actually on January 28th. So we are hoping that you will join us for that, where we will go more in depth on the species that we're seeing, the behaviors, et cetera, for the Dulles Wetlands. And this little cutie right here is one of our critters that we have found in the Dulles Wetlands. And this is a toadlet for a Fowler's toad. And you can see just how small they are, hence being part of our unseen world. It's these little toadlets are very, very small, and so oftentimes can go very unnoticed. So we have a kind of a budding trail cam project that is in conjunction rather with the reptile and amphibian work that we do. And they don't seem to connect, but in a way they actually rather do. How this got started is reptiles and amphibians are very, very fragile species. Worldwide, we're getting a lot of decline in populations, either from habitat loss, pollution, people who are hunting these animals, killing them unnecessarily, poaching for the pet trade. And actually that is a bigger problem than people realize even here in Virginia. But in Loudoun County specifically, we are seeing rapid development, as everyone knows, And that has the need for us to really examine what the populations of our reptiles and amphibians look like throughout Loudoun County. Dulles Wetlands is one of those locations that we are surveying for populations to monitor and continue to monitor the health of these species of reptiles and amphibians. And just a little side note, this little cutie, I know it's all relative, but for me, this little cutie over here is the state snake of Virginia. That is an eastern garter snake. And if anyone is familiar with the eastern garter snake, generally they tend to have more of a blacker to gray coloration, sometimes going into the browns and tans. But as you can see, this one is a natural morph. And that does happen naturally. And you can see where it is actually orange and yellow rather than traditional colors that we are used to seeing. So why we study the reptiles and amphibians is, again, they are very sensitive animals. Amphibians have a lot of absorption of toxins in and out of their system. Changes in their populations can often indicate an overall decrease in the health of an ecosystem. They are often one of the first species that you see that will start to decline if we start to see too much pollution, too much runoff into a stream, too much sedimentation because of clearing prior habitat for development. They are a critical part of our healthy ecosystem. They act as both predators and prey. Sometimes it's a very sad thing to know that the species that you're looking at they're destined to potentially become food for a whole host of animals, including the eagles that Liz just talked about. And this lovely little critter here is actually another one from the Dulles Wetlands, and this is a pickerel frog. There's a very healthy population of pickerel frogs, both in the swamp wetland areas and down at the Goose Creek area of the wetlands. However, when we started doing surveys, we actually, and with my history and background of a lot of field research and field work and a history of working with otters, we started to see a lot of fresh signs of otter activity. And on the left is one of my favorite things to talk about, which is poop. So this is otter poop. Over here on the left, a couple of piles, and it is fresher otter poop. And how do we know that? Because otters oftentimes eat fish and other aquatic animals that can leave quite a strong pungent smell. And the smellier the otter poop, the more fresh it generally tends to be. So we like pungent otter poop here in our world. The other sign that we would see are what are called otter slides. And those are areas oftentimes where water meets land. And over here on the right, you can see where there's this indent coming out from the wetland area into the dry land. And those are areas where, when otters are locomoting, oftentimes they will, if the conditions are right, locomote to save energy by sliding on their bellies. And they will do this coming in and out of water. They will also do this a lot of times on more softer grounds and in the snow. When I did work around Yellowstone, you would actually see sea otters sliding around on the tops of the snow as well. So when we see these slides that are damp around the end where the water meets the land, that's indication that there is new signs of otter activity. So as people who are looking for reptiles and amphibians, why did the presence of otters matter as much? Well, otters are considered an apex predator, as Liz discussed with the different stages, different places where these animals fit into in the food chain. Excuse me. They are a top predator. We in the reptile and amphibian world call them charismatic mammals because they are one of those that look so cute and look so sweet and look so cuddly and playful, but they really are tenacious predators. They will actively hunt fish, turtles, small mammals, birds, anything that they can, they will hunt. And they are very successful at it. I actually worked in the zoo field and worked with several species of otters, from river otters to sea otters. And one of the more tenacious ones were actually an Asian small clawed otter, and they are very, very strong. All these otters are strong. And I remember actually having an otter pull, or 3 otters pull a net out of my hand because they wanted to play with it. And they were so strong in their desire to play with this that I couldn't actually keep a hold of this net. The apex predator, though, is an important part of our ecosystem, and they may play a significant part in maintaining a healthy balance of predators to prey. As a result of the sign of the recent activity that we saw, signs of these, we set up the trail cams to see if we could capture videos of these predators. The reason that we use trail cams, and they're actually a wonderful tool, even in neighborhoods, we have some people who, since we've been doing this, have set them up in their neighborhood homes and have been amazed at what they see go through their yards, is they are minimally impactful to the natural behaviors of wildlife. And I say minimally because you'll see in one of these few videos that I have that sometimes they can see that motion light and are curious about what it is. As soon as we step foot into a habitat, either by sight, sound, smell, vibrations, we are unknowingly oftentimes impacting the natural behaviors of the wildlife there. So the beauty of a trail cam is we will see things that we normally don't see. And so on the first night when we set up the trail cams, we were able to see otters. So this is a group of 4 otters. Again, charismatic mammals. And this is actually quite an interesting video that we were able to capture this first time because this is a latrine behavior. What these animals are actually doing is you'll see them, they are jumping and taking their front paws and scooping grass and pulling grass and taking it between their front and rear legs and putting it into a roll. And they're actually urinating and defecating in those rolls. And we call this kind of a social media Facebook for otters, if you will. There's a lot of scent information that is passed along from this group of otters to another group of otters. So you will see other groups of otters also join in this latrine behavior at other times as well. And this is another one of our otters. And he just happens to come running on back. But these guys are really, really active, especially at night. We do see some activity during the day, but at night they do tend to be much more active hunters. They have very, very good night vision, very good sense of smell. Olfactory is very important to this group of animals. It includes the otters. But we do also get them sometimes during the day. This over here where they're going is one of their slides. Now, this is actually later in the season where we have a lot more growth. And so they're running past the slide. You can see the moment when they start to splash into the water. These animals, not just the otters, but the deer, the coyotes, the possums, they will follow game trails, which are naturally made trails that wildlife will follow, almost like if we were to take a sidewalk or a path. However, I typically will maintain a small trail through parts of the wetlands to be able to get around without having to deal with the high vegetation. And we're finding that actually the wildlife are following those man-made trail paths as well. So we set up these cameras in a couple of locations off of that. And so given the success that we did have with the trail cams, we set up additional cameras to find out what other wildlife we were seeing at the Dulles Wetlands. So we have captured video for such species as several of the mesopredators, which are the middle of the trophic layers, of coyotes, possums, skunks. And the mesopredators are more of a middle and more opportunistic. A lot of times they are the ones that you're going to see scavenging and they're going to be going after a wider range. And sometimes they'll eat plant material, sometimes they'll eat animal material. So they have a wider range. Now, if you take out the apex predator in an ecosystem, a lot of times those mesopredators can become an apex predator because they don't have any higher competition, but they are often less effective and they leave certain species unchecked. And our example of our area, which we know, is our white-tailed deer. And examples of how some of these mesopredators actually are very, very important to our ecosystems is skunks. A lot of people don't realize are a primary yellow jacket predator, and they are very, very capable of digging up and consuming an entire yellow jacket nest in the nighttime. And I actually have several of those that have happened in my property. Snakes are fantastic rodent predators. So if you don't want rodents around your house, the snakes aren't so bad to have around. Raccoons as well. They will go for the small rodents. They'll go for the grubs. They will go for crustaceans, anything on that middle area, and they help keep everything in check as well. We've also observed a variety of birds, from birds of prey to herons, to ducks, both on the wetlands and on the adjoining Goose Creek. Beavers as well. And actually, as this kind of all rolls back, those trail cams also give us recordings of the frog and toad calls. And that does give us additional information to add to the species we're observing while we're doing our on-the-ground surveys as well. And why this is important all the way around is that we can look at reptiles and amphibians and say, okay, well, we have X reptiles or X amphibians on this particular site. And that gives us just a piece of that picture. But if we also know that the wetlands has eagles and hawks and otters, and it has, a variety of rodents, and it has a healthy insect population, we know and we can get a bigger picture of what exactly is going on in these wetlands, what exactly this ecosystem is like. And if we're seeing all these components fall into place, we're looking at how we have a more healthy ecosystem, and reptiles and amphibians play a huge part in that. So it does have a connection in the grand spectrum of all of this. So this is our little curious raccoon. This video is actually facing Goose Creek. And yes, some of our species can see the motion sensor light that goes on some of these cameras. Obviously, this little raccoon, who is not mangy, this raccoon is wet. He was just down in the creek, which is down where you see the logs at the base, and has come up and saw the motion light. So is taking a good look-see at this light. And then we do get some of our mesopredators. This one is a coyote, eastern coyote. And we do have a relatively healthy population of them as well at the Dulles Wetlands. We do have video footage of them catching rabbits and actually catching some birds. So there's a variety of species that they are predating on as well. They do tend to, again, you can see how they're using the trails that we have created just to be able to maneuver around the wetlands, because it's an easier way to travel. So it makes it actually quite a bit easier to be able to figure out where you want to place these cameras. And this is kind of the swamp area, with a bunch of turkeys just wandering through the water. Again, this is the kind of activity that you're not necessarily going to see when you are actually at the wetlands, because your presence can disturb these natural behaviors. So we're fortunate with these camera videos to be able to see more of the behaviors that we would normally see. So that is my 15 minutes of fame for the evening. And in 2 weeks, on the 28th, at 7 p.m. We will be doing a complete presentation with more detail on our unseen world of the Dulles Wetlands, and we hope that you will join us. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jenny. That's fantastic stuff. And again, we've got just a few minutes left, and we've got 3 minutes left actually, and we've got 3 questions, so that works out pretty well. So just wanted to ask, I think these first 2 are most likely for Liz. So Liz, Jackie Rivas, I'm sorry, I missed Melissa's. Let me get back to hers real quick first. Melissa asks, how do raptors catch the flu from the water birds?
Okay, well, what's happening there is this particular virus, H5N1, is very persistent in the environment. The waterfowl shed it in their excrement and their nasal secretions, and it can then live in the soil and the water for quite some time, weeks, potentially months. They can also catch it by contact with the waterfowl or by consuming the waterfowl. So there are many routes by which they can contract that. And then once they have it, they can spread it among themselves and now even into a variety of mammals and other animals. So it's quite a dangerous virus, particularly at this time of year. It thrives in cool, wet conditions. So hopefully in the summer, we'll see a little bit lessening of it.
Great. Thank you for that. And then Liz, I think this is another one for you. Jackie Rivas asks, what is the effect of lead poisoning on an eagle? Does it affect their reproduction rates and its chicks?
All right. So the problem with lead is that it is a neurotoxin. So it really impacts every aspect of their lives, from reproduction, hunting, defense, courtship, everything. And of course, the higher the level of lead, the more impactful it is. So we do see birds with high levels of lead that have seizures, they have tremors, they have a very depressed state, they can really no longer function. But even at lower levels, it does impact all those aspects. So we see more frequent accidents. Birds with high levels of lead or even moderate levels of lead are more often hit by cars, more often fly into obstacles, more often get into altercations that they lose and have other kinds of accidents. They're also weakened and contract other illnesses. They're more subject to starvation. It's a really horrible situation. The lead poisoning is something we really need to address. There is no reason really for hunters to be continuing to use lead and to add that lead into the environment. It's not just eagles either. It's any scavengers. We're talking about foxes, snakes, raccoons, any animal that is a scavenger.
Great. Thank you so much for those answers. And then the last question, Joe, I saw that you were adding something to the chat there, and I did as well. But Jackie was also asking if there are any upcoming walks scheduled through the wetlands to observe the flora and fauna, and wondering if you wanted to say anything about the January 25th walk that is currently scheduled.
We do have the walk scheduled on the 25th, and it is currently full. But if we get enough interest, there's a good chance we'll add a second walk, possibly even the next day. And depending on the interest, we may add another one more closely to that. But we will have, in addition to the one on the 26th, on the 25th, we'll probably be adding at least one in February and one in March as well. We do cut back on the walks there once it starts to warm up, because there is a very extensive population of ticks on the wetlands. And some of us, manage to work around that, but it bothers a whole lot of people. And we find that it's better not to take people out there once it warms up.
All right, great.
Can I interject about the walks as well?
Sure, absolutely.
Yes, Jenny.
Sorry. We actually, from a reptile and amphibian standpoint, are starting to schedule our night amphibian walks. We have them scheduled at Black Oak. On a high level, it will depend on precipitation, but that also will depend for Dulles Wetlands. We like to do at least 1 or 2 evening amphibian walks at the wetlands. And that is something that gets scheduled a little bit closer to the dates, as we have to watch temperature and precipitation because they're amphibian centered walks. However, being able to go out in an evening time, you really do get to see a whole different world of the wetlands, species that come alive after the sun starts to go down. So keep an eye out on the Loudoun website for that as well. I just wanted to add that as.
And I know we're just about done, but with that in mind, I wanted to add that if you go to maybe we can put the link for the cameras that are on the Eagle's Nest. And if you go there and listen at night, it's just amazing what you hear. Sometimes I just have it on in the background just to hear all the night sounds in particular.
Yeah, the nighttime in the
I,
wetlands and any habitat really is a whole new world, and that's where I love the amphibian work because most of the work we do is at night, so you get the privilege of hearing that.
I'd actually like to add a little bit there. I've been there in the evening, in spring and early summer, trying to listen for birds, and there isn't a chance that we're going to be able to hear birds sometimes because of the amphibian, about the volume of the amphibians on the wetlands. It's absolutely fantastic. The noise level is incredible. I wish somebody had a noise meter along and would measure it sometime. Have you ever done that, Jenny?
I have on a very high level, but actually with the bioacoustic equipment, we'll be able to actually get a lot more information about how
Yeah.
loud they actually are. Some of it's actually deafening. People who work in areas, especially where the spring peepers are in mass,
Yeah.
often wear
Yeah.
earplugs because it will hurt your ears. It's so loud.
It's incredible. And it just shows how healthy it is there.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what comes of that equipment, Jenny, too, for sure. Well, with that, just want to thank everyone for coming. Really appreciate everyone for coming out. So thankful to Joe, Liz, and Jenny for giving some great presentations tonight. And also in the chat is a link where you can register for the next event, which is January 28th, the next Wild About the Dulles Wetlands. And as Jenny mentioned, that's called The Unseen World. She'll be leading that. And if you want to get a look at kind of what happens when wildlife doesn't think anyone is around, when they're not paying attention, or when the wildlife cams are operational, that should be an interesting one. So we hope to have you back for that. And in the meantime, hope you all have a great week. And thank you so much for your continued support, and stay warm. We'll see you soon.